Congresswoman Omar, the last time I spoke to you, you said that I was stupid for asking you about your financial disclosure, but there's some discrepancies on there. Would you like to explain that? How did you make such a big mistake on
I
it?
still do think you're stupid for asking me anything.
I am?
Yes.
Well, what about the American people who are wondering how you made such a big
I have
mistake?
explained to the American people.
What's the explanation?
I have given them the explanation.
Do you want to tell our viewers? Because
I don't want to tell you jack shit.
Oh.
How about that?
Okay.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
And there's more fallout from this fraud scandal that rocked Minnesota. Republicans on that state's Fraud Prevention and Oversight Committee furious after they say Democrat Representative Ilhan Omar failed to appear at a scheduled hearing tied to the investigation. And now they are calling for her to turn over all of her records and communications. Investigative correspondent Rich McHugh has been digging into the layers behind this massive scandal for months. So, Rich, what happens if Representative Omar fails to comply with their demands?
Well, it's not entirely clear, Nicole. Minnesota lawmakers have limited powers, but it's certainly possible and feasible that the U.S. Oversight Committee with the U.S. House of Representatives could subpoena these documents that they're going after and her campaign finance reports. You know, Minnesota lawmakers say that ultimately she ghosted them, that she did not respond to the request for to show up at this hearing and so far has not complied or provided any documentation. State Rep Kristen Robbins, she's the chair of the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention and State Oversight Committee, says Omar refused to testify before the Fraud Prevention Committee, ducked reporter questions, and she authored the bill that made it possible for this fraud to happen in the first place.
She created the conditions that allowed all these bad actors to come in and bill for thousands of meals a day, a week. I mean, it was incomprehensible numbers. One little tiny restaurant serving 5,000 meals a day, 7 days a week.
We first reported on that restaurant last November, the Safari restaurant, where Omar was a fixture and even held campaign parties. The restaurant, which seats about 35, supposedly served 18,000 meals a day. Robbins is asking for Omar's communications, written and electronic, with the now convicted owners of that restaurant and with over a dozen people convicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal.
Look, we need to talk about this clip because there's a lot going on here, and it's not just about one awkward exchange. It's about what happens when basic questions don't get basic answers. You got a reporter asking about financial disclosures, pointing out that there are discrepancies, and instead of getting any kind of explanation, their response immediately turns dismissive. You are stupid for asking me anything. I don't want to tell you anything. And the conversation shuts down right there. Now pause for a second and think about that. This isn't some random argument online. This is a public official being asked about financial information that's supposed to be transparent. That's part of the job. So when the response is to avoid the question instead of answering it clearly, people are going to notice. And here's the thing. This situation didn't come out of nowhere. There's already scrutiny building around financial disclosures that reportedly show a major jump in the value of certain businesses connected to her household. And we're talking about businesses that were previously valued much lower and then suddenly being listed in the range of millions. So naturally, people are going to ask a simple question. What changed? Because jumps like that don't just happen quietly. Think about it like this. If a small business in your area suddenly went from being worth $50,000 to tens of millions, that will raise eyebrows immediately. People will want to understand what led to that growth, whether it was a new investment, expansion, or something else entirely. And when that explanation isn't clearly laid out, it creates a gap. And people fill that gap with their own assumptions. And this is where it starts to matter because it's not just about numbers on a form anymore. It's about trust. When transparency is expected and instead people get pushback or silence, it makes everything feel less clear. And one thing you see over and over again in situations like this is that the reaction can end up becoming a bigger story than the original question. Here's what people miss. Even if there is a reasonable explanation, not giving it or not giving it clearly can make things look worse than they are. And that's how you end up here, where a simple question turns into a much bigger situation. If there's one takeaway from this part, is this. When something is easy to explain but doesn't get explained, people start asking why, and that question doesn't go away.
Republicans, like Lauren said, they are pushing this ethics probe over your family's finances and your husband's business dealings. What do you think that's really about? Is it accountability or politics?
Well, it's not accountability because they haven't done anything formally, right? Mm-hmm. So it is just politics. Mm-hmm. It's like we're going to subpoena, we're going to do that. It's like it's all of these things that are they're never going to do. So they're just saying it because then that gets them an interview on Fox or Newsmax, or you'll see they tweet and like 5 minutes later, if you check, they already got a clip of themselves being interviewed 5 seconds later. If you've done something illegal, you would investigate.
But they're not investigating you.
I have not been made aware of an investigation into me or my family.
But when you look at the increase in your household wealth tied to your husband's companies, you understand why that raises questions for people watching from that outside.
Yeah, but that's again one of the it's their saying, right? Like there is no wealth increase. If you look at my husband's income, it's almost non-existent. He's helped make sure our children are going to college, and our young one is taken care of. There is no wealth. There ranges to businesses that he was invested in. I'm pretty sure. I don't even know what.
Well, they say. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Because they said you reported a net worth between $6 million and $30 million, and they said your 2023 disclosure was roughly $40,000. Between $40,000 and a quarter million.
Yeah, but they're not net worths. They're like the asset things for the companies.
Now, this is where it gets interesting, because when she's asked directly about the situation, the explanation shifts in a very specific direction. She says there's no real increase in wealth, that the numbers people are pointing to are being misrepresented. And that's what's being reported as just assets or asset ranges tied to businesses, not actual net worth. And on the surface, that may sound like a reasonable clarification, because financial disclosures can be confusing and they often use ranges instead of exact numbers. But here's where it starts to raise more questions than it answers. A correction was later filed saying that those earlier valuations were wrong and that the actual value of those assets was dramatically lower. Now, being described in a range of tens of thousands instead of millions. Now, think about that for a second. I'm going to say it again. Now being described in a range of tens of thousands instead of millions. So the assets was dramatically lower. And if you think about that, that's not a small adjustment. That's not rounding something up or down. That's the difference between something being moderately valued and something being described as massively valuable. And this is where it doesn't add up for a lot of people, because errors do happen. Accounting mistakes happen. Filings get amended all the time, but the size of the gap matters. When you're talking about a shift from millions down to under 100,000, people are going to stop and ask how that kind of mistake happens in the first place. Was it a misunderstanding of how to report the assets? Was it an error from whoever prepared the documents? Or was something initially reported in a way that didn't reflect the real situation? Here's what people miss. When corrections only happen after scrutiny starts building, it changes how those corrections are perceived. Even if the updated numbers are accurate, the timing makes people question the process that led there. And then you add another layer to it, reports that one of the businesses connected to these disclosures was dissolved during the same period that questions were starting to circulate. Now and again, there could be completely normal explanations for that. Businesses close all the time for all kinds of reasons. But when multiple things happen at once, big valuation changes, amended filings, and a company shutting down, it creates a pattern that people naturally want explained. And this is how you end up with a situation where the issue is no longer just about paperwork, it's about credibility. Because from the outside looking in, it starts to feel like the story keeps changing depending on when you ask the question. And this part matters. When the explanation keeps shifting even slightly, it becomes harder for people to figure out what's actually consistent. One clear takeaway: when the numbers change drastically and the explanation comes later, people don't just question the numbers, they question the process behind them. That's the one clear takeaway from this. And that's what keeps this whole situation from going away.
And here's the Minnesota House Fraud Committee wants answers from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and they're not getting them. Financial disclosures had said the estate of Omar and her husband, Tim Minette, jumped from being in debt to somewhere between $6 million and $30 million in 2024. They amended their financial disclosure and released it to show the estate is really somewhere between $18,000 and $95,000. They blame the discrepancy as much as $29 million on an accountant who did not subtract the liabilities of Minette's businesses. And this is the same Congresswoman who championed the Meals Act. That was the COVID relief program intended to provide food for poor kids suffering during the pandemic. Republicans say that created the pathway for the Feeding Our Future scandal, a $250 million boondoggle of meals billed but never provided. A restaurant at the center of the scandal was a safari restaurant. Omar held campaign events there. One of the owners, Salem Ahmed Saeed, was convicted for his role in the scandal. The Republican chair of the House Fraud Committee made repeated requests for Omar to show up. No response from Omar.
It's just another example of disrespecting Minnesotans. She thinks she can get away with things like this because she's, a powerful politician, but Minnesotans are fed up. Minnesotans in her district are fed up. They really care about how their money is spent.
Representative Kristen Robbins there has now sent a letter to Congresswoman Omar asking her to disclose, among other things, communications with defendants in the Feeding Our Future scandal and donations from them. But Robbins, who I should note is campaigning for the Republican nomination for governor, says the committee has no subpoena power. Our requests for comments from Omar's office are unanswered.
We invited Representative Ilhan Omar to this hearing. We left her 2 voicemails at the end of March. We've written 2 letters, one on March 13th and one on March 30th. We also sent an invite on April 15th via her scheduling portal, and we have not had any response. And I do think it's very important to this discussion, and so I'm just going to reference why I wanted to bring her into this conversation, and I know my friends on the other side of the aisle are curious, but so there's a lot of talk in a lot of these reports about how the Feeding Our Future happened because guardrails were taken off the federal school nutrition program.
Hi, Leader Jeffries. Good to see you. Just curious to get your thoughts on Ilhan Omar's financial disclosure. Does all of the scrutiny around that concern you at all, and does that warrant an official House ethics investigation?
That issue has not been brought to my attention, but we do know that Ilhan Omar, who works hard on behalf of the people that she represents in Minnesota, is constantly under attack by right-wing conspiracy theorists.
Well, what about her net worth going from $30 million to now under $100,000? Do you believe that's truly an accounting error, as she alluded to?
It's not an issue that I'm familiar with.
What about her winery that she is now dissolving from her financial disclosure?
We're working to stop this reckless war of choice in the Middle East, get the economy back on track, win this gerrymandering war that Donald Trump started that we're going to finish. It's not an issue that I've been locked in on up to date.
Hi, Congresswoman Omar. You were just talking about how Trump's economy has failed the American people, but I think the American people really want to know how you went from a negative $65,000 before coming into Congress to over $30 million in just 7 years.
My disclosure is public now.
Yeah, it is. And so a lot of people now are looking into that and finding S. Crew Winery, a winery that doesn't actually seem to exist. Is that a real winery, or?
Do you all actually look at and read things, or do you just ask silly questions?
Well, it's listed in the financial disclosure, so can you explain it? Because we have a lot of questions about it, and things just aren't adding up. There's no real phone number. There's no real location.
Why did you want to buy some wine?
Probably not from you, to be honest. You recently stated that the American people should be afraid of the white man. They should be fearful of the white man.
I never said that.
Yeah, you're on video saying it.
Our country should be more fearful of white men across our country, because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country.
I did not. Yes, you.
Again, this is like what I said. You need to prepare yourself, because you can't continue embarrassing yourself like this.
So I'm just a liar.
What I was quoting was an actual study done by the FBI.
Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you, Congresswoman.
Now, this is where the situation starts to feel a lot bigger than just paperwork, because when you line up the timeline, a pattern starts to form that people can't ignore. You got financial disclosures showing large valuations, then amended filings bringing those numbers way down. And at the same time, one of the businesses connected to those disclosures, specifically a winery tied to her household, ends up being dissolved. Now, if you think about that and how that looks from the outside, a business that was previously listed as having significant value suddenly drops to zero because it no longer exists. And that change happens right as scrutiny is building. That doesn't automatically mean anything improper happened, but it absolutely raises questions that people expect to be answered clearly. And this is where it connects to something even broader, because at the same time, there are ongoing concerns tied to the Feeding Our Future scandal in Minnesota, a case where federal prosecutors have already charged and convicted multiple individuals in the scheme involving hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent meal claims. Now, to be clear, being connected socially or politically to people who later get charged is not the same as being involved in wrongdoing. But when there are overlapping names, shared locations like that restaurant mentioned in the reports, and then separate questions about financial disclosures happening at the same time, people start looking at the full picture instead of isolated pieces. That's how you end up here, where multiple storylines start blending together into one larger concern about accountability. And then there's the issue of cooperation, requests for testimony, requests for documents, and reports that those requests haven't been answered. And again, there could be explanation for that, whether it's legal, strategy, scheduling, or something else. But from the public's perspective, it adds another layer of distance instead of clarity. And when several unanswered questions stack on top of each other, even small gaps start to feel significant. And this matters because public trust isn't just built on what is proven, it's built on whether people feel like they're getting straight answers. When that doesn't happen, the story keeps expanding. One clear takeaway is this: when timing, missing explanations, and major changes all line up at once, people don't just focus on one detail. They start questioning the entire sequence of events. And that's what keeps this conversation going.
Mercy, felonies, are they going to be raining down on Ilhan Omar any minute?
Well, I got to tell you, this, I was on an airplane and it was literally Ilhan Omar and the husband. Ilhan got to be in first class. The poor husband didn't make the cut to first class, but she did have security when she got off the plane. So do
you guys like to sit together on the planes? Or?
I like to sit with her. I give you the update.
I got to tell you, this is not a minor accountant error. This is too big to not investigate, to further investigate. You can't go from $6 to $30 million to then just $18,000 or $95,000.
So many zeros.
And we know when you're doing your congressional disclosure forms, you are supposed to include what your spouse is earning and include that in the disclosure and what assets you may have. And obviously, this is something that what is the fishiest part of all of this is that they dissolved that winery, that so-called winery. By the way, what type of winery is it? What were they doing? We have no idea. And this raises the bigger questions about what other potential fraud she might be involved in.
Good point. It also makes me as a lawyer think they're going to be going after that business partner. I think law enforcement is going to be going and talk to him, maybe seeing if he's going to be cutting a deal or making any sort of remarks that might go to the heart of this. Matt, one of the things I was researching with these financial forms is you have to have intent to deceive. How hard do you think it will be to prove that? I mean, given what we've seen from her.
Look, I filled out these forms. Members of Congress fill out these forms. The reason why there's this big swing, they say between 8 million and 30 million, because you have boxes that have ranges on them. But I'm old now. I've never, ever known a congressperson or a candidate to disclose a $30 million asset and then say, whoops, I don't have a $30 million asset. Now, there have been a lot of candidates and members who didn't disclose millions of dollars in assets because they didn't think they had to, and then they realized they had to, and they had to amend their form. But to say your net worth is between 8 and 30 million, and then the next year your net worth is 18,000 or whatever, this is just begs for people to look into this. And I agree with Mercy. An asset that's worth at least $8 million that then just poof goes away after you've shown to have benefited from a bunch of scandalous government grants in Minnesota, there needs to be a big investigation here. Sorry, I didn't really answer your question because the intent piece is a separate question, but I just want people to know how I've never known of a congressperson to lose all their net worth because they disclosed something and then the next year they didn't disclose it.
Yeah, what's the point of that, Tim? Like, what's the strategy here? Also, Winery, $50,000, and then in 1 year it went to what, $5 million? That must be some great wine. I know.
Well, think about this. I mean, this is the state of California that does this to a beloved Democrat, member of Congress. So this must be, not just smoke, but absolute fire breaking through the door. Because if you think about Ilhan Omar, I mean, we remember, she had all these credible evidence against her. She married her brother in order to secure citizenship. Tax fraud. Before she even started in Congress, she was on the hook for that and allegations. Then you have the perjury, evidence toward that. There is not just smoke here. This is an absolute Fahrenheit 4-alarm fire, go home,
And look, family, this is where the conversation shifts from questions to what people believe should happen next. Because when you look at everything together, the large valuation changes, the amended disclosures, the dissolved business, I should say, not businesses, business, and the lack of clear answers, you start to hear more calls for a formal investigation. And to be fair, that's not unusual in situations like this, where there are big discrepancies, especially involving public officials. The standard response is to dig deeper and figure out what actually happened. Now, some people argue this could be tied to her husband's business dealings, more than anything directly connected to her role in office, pointing to past reports where investors raised concerns about how certain business ventures were being managed. And again, nothing there has been proven in court as wrongdoing in this context, but it adds another layer that people are looking at when trying to make sense of the bigger picture. Think about it like this. If you're trying to understand a situation, you don't just look at one detail. You look at patterns, timelines, and how everything connects. So when a business is listed as a high valuation, then later corrected to a much lower number, and at the same time that business is shut down while questions are being asked, people naturally start to ask whether those events are related or just coincidental. And raising questions is not the same as proving guilt, but avoiding those questions doesn't make them go away either. In fact, it usually does the opposite. And this is where it matters, because in public office, perception and trust go hand in hand. Even the appearance of something not adding up can be enough to keep a story alive, especially when there isn't a clear, consistent explanation that people can follow from start to finish. Now, and this doesn't automatically mean there's wrongdoing. It means there are unresolved questions. And in a situation like this, the only way those questions get resolved is through transparency, documentation, and if necessary, formal review by the appropriate bodies. That's how you separate speculation from fact. When the numbers change dramatically and the explanations don't fully connect, the conversation doesn't end. It escalates until there's clarity. And I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just breaking this all the way down. And also, I hear individuals, I want to get you guys' thoughts of individuals saying, look, this goes deeper because politically she took pictures with individuals who was convicted in Minnesota, part of the Somali fraud. And then on top of that, not to mention that if you're taking pictures with these convicted individuals that have come convicted, it raises questions about campaign funds as well. Let me know what you think about that. But I'm here to break this down so you can see it clearly for yourself. At the end of the day, this comes down to something simple. People want to understand what happened. And they want to know that the same standards apply across the board, because when accountability feels uneven, confidence in the process starts to fade. And that's why situations like this matter beyond just one person. They shape how people view the system as a whole. If this helped you understand it better, let me know what you think. And subscribe for more breakdowns like this. Catch you in the next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate, family. Peace.